Welcome back, viewers. This is Literary Goa, the program where we look at books and talk to their authors. And the most fascinating thing is the kind of range of people we meet through their books. Today we have with us Mr. Tino Disa. He always says, "Call me Tino," but I find it tough. The reason for it is that he is the author of the 3 books. No, that's not the reason. The reason is that he was the former chief secretary till very recently of the large Indian state of Madhya Pradesh, which is in central India. Now resettled in Porvorim. We are glad to have you back, Mr. Disa. I've been following your work a little bit through the years, and we are really proud to have you as a Goan working at the top of the civil services bureaucracy in Madhya Pradesh. But today, of course, we are focusing on your books. So tell us about them.
Thank you for having me here, Rico. About my books. Actually, I write short stories, and I've always liked to write short stories. I wrote these short stories which are Goa-based short stories, and which are collected as One for Sorrow, Two for Joy.
This one, yeah.
Yeah, and like 3 themes bind the 8 stories here. One is the nursery rhyme, 1 for sorrow, 2 for joy, 3 for girl, 4 for boy. So like each story, one deals with sorrow and joy, one deals with boys and girls, one deals with silver and gold, one deals with food, and one deals with a secret not to be told, that kind of thing. So the nursery rhyme binds these 8 stories, and also in each of these stories, the chief character is a woman. So kind of women bind the 8 stories, and they're all set in Goa. So this is this book that I wrote.
Fascinating way of explaining it. I was reading late last night. I was reading one of the stories from here, and I found your narration simply fascinating. That's a story about
Auntie Effie's chest.
Effie's chest. So you start off keeping us guessing what you're talking about very mischievously, and then the story goes on and it unveils this very typical Goan kind of setting, and the jostling that goes on, and this lady who trusts herself as a guest,
yes,
on some distant family members,
yeah,
and they initially don't want her, and then things suddenly change dramatically. And of course, we won't be plot spoilers to give away the full story.
Yeah.
But it's told very fascinatingly. I really enjoyed the way it's told.
I'm glad you liked it. I'm glad. Well, because what I like to do is always have, I mean, as far as possible, it's not always possible, but I love to have a twist in the tale at the end of stories, because I enjoy reading stories like that.
So I want to interrupt you at this stage. I mean, we are here to discuss your books, but it would not do justice to Tino Disa, the person, if we don't talk about your career in the IAS.
Okay.
Last year, almost exactly 1 year back, on 5th of June 2021, you were the inaugural speaker at the Collaborative Learning Cafe, one of our projects.
Yes,
and you spoke.
Great privilege to do that.
You spoke. You were encouraging youngsters to enter the IAS. Tell us about your career in the IAS. How it started, where it reached. I mean, that's a long time. I mean, but if you want to telescope it and.
Well, no, just very briefly, I have always been interested in actually, I love architecture, and if I hadn't gotten to the IAS, I think I would have done architecture. But I'm also very fond of organizing things, doing things, and managing things. I've always loved that. Small little things. How can something be done better? That kind of thing. And so I sort of tried for this exam, and got into the IAS. I studied in a small town called Bhusawal. I went to school in Bhusawal.
That's a railway junction
It's a railway junction, in fact. Yeah. In fact, when I was in school, I knew nothing about the IAS, because our only connection with the collector, there was no collector also in Bhusawal, he was in Jalgaon, was if he happened to visit our school, and then we all wore our special uniform. And I used to think in school that the collector's main job was to visit schools. But only later on, of course, one went to college and heard about the civil services. I went to college in Bombay.
Xavier's.
And then Xavier's. And then I sat for the exam in Bombay, and thanks to God I got in. And I was allotted the Madhya Pradesh cadre. So I've spent all my life in Madhya Pradesh and in Delhi, because we go on deputation to
You were
Delhi.
one of the longest serving chief secretaries there? Or?
Yes, the only one chief, I served for 3.5 years as chief secretary, and in fact, the only one person has served longer, and coincidentally was also a Goan who served 40 years before I served.
RCVP Noronha.
RCV, Noronha.
Yeah.
So he served in the 1960s as chief secretary. And yeah, I was of course in the 2013.
Of course, we will not enter the issue of what it entails and dealing with the political class and managing them. That's a different issue altogether, and we are not political here. But what's your word of advice before we leave this subject? What's your word of advice to young people as far as the IAS goes?
See, I think it is a fascinating career, and I would certainly think. But your motivation, you see, like in any job, I mean, whatever it is, you should have the right motivation to be able to enjoy the job. I mean, if you're simply looking for, position and fame, yes, I mean, all of us look for that in the careers, whether we become doctors or engineers or not. We always want a high position. We want to be known. That is there. But you should also be inclined towards, you have to realize the focus of getting into the civil services, not only the IAS, but any other service, is ultimately the civil service exists for the betterment of society. And if you are interested in that kind of work, I think the IAS offers a fantastic career, a fantastic profession, because you can professionalize the kind of work that you do, and it offers a great deal of variety. So if you are a person like me who likes variety, for example, I always feel that it would be difficult for me to have been only in one kind of job all my life.
Right.
So the IAS offers you that variety. I mean, one day you are in education, another day you may be in health, or you may be in law and order, or you may be in industry.
Quite a challenge.
Yeah, so it's challenging, it's interesting, and you learn then that what you are actually doing is basically management and administering, how you apply principles from one department to another. So it's interesting. And I think it offers a great career opportunity, and I would encourage anybody who would like to sit for the civil services to take a try at that.
There is some science to answering the exam, the very tough exam?
I see there is no real science, but I would only give one small bit of advice. See, it is a competitive exam, so you are basically competing with other people.
Right.
So it's not a question of passing or failing. Now, and the people you're competing are also very good in their subjects and whatever.
Right.
So what you should aim at is, apart from knowing your subject well, whatever you're answering, is to write something a little different from the normal. You cannot just reproduce what is in your textbook. And so you have to read widely. You have to have wide discussions with other people so that your mind thinks in, that kind of lateral thinking. And if you can bring even 10% of that to bear on your answers, that gives you a little edge. I feel that is the trick to shining out when, you have 10 million people sitting for the initial exam and then 1 million people sitting for that. Ultimately, and you have to come in the top 100. So you have to show something different from others.
The numbers are huge, but no reason to
not at all, not because many of them just sit for the sake of sitting. If you're serious, numbers should not worry you.
So that's a good bridge to discuss the next issue, which is your entry into writing, the short story competitions. Tell us about that. How did it start? Where did it start? Who encouraged you at the earlier stage?
See, I have always loved writing. I love writing. And I remember I had a bit of a thrill because when I was in the 5th standard or 6th standard, something like that, I went on a school tour to Rajasthan, to Ajmer and Jaipur, out of the school. And I came back and I wrote a piece on that, and I sent it to the Indian Express Sunday magazine in those days that used to come out.
Sunday Standard?
No. Indian Express. But on Sundays they had something called a Sunday magazine that came along with the Indian Express.
Right.
And it wasn't a children's page or anything like that. It was simply that. and it appeared. So I was quite.
I can imagine the high you get when you see it in print the first time. Yeah.
I couldn't even believe it, and it appeared, and so that gave
That
me
gave
a
you the
thrill.
push, the boost.
So I continued writing, but all I could write, all I had time for writing were middles. I used to write a lot of middles in the Times of India, and in the days when Times of India used to have middles, and they used to appear. But no real, actually, I didn't get down to writing any fiction. The first set of stories that I wrote were these: One for Sorrow, Two for Joy, were the stories on Goa. Goa-based
before
stories.
retiring? Before retiring?
Before retirement. I wrote it before retirement, but it never got published because I never actually had the time to put it together. Because, Rico, publishing is hard work, and then you put it together, and every different publisher wants it in a certain format and wants this, like that, and things like that. Anyway, so I never actually got down to doing that. And then I retired from service, and the very year that I retired, I had a post-retirement assignment as chairman of RERA, but I still had a little more time on my hands, and I saw the Times of India National Short Story Competition, the Right India Season 2, they called it then. So I sent in a short story. And that's an interesting thing because they give you a little prompt by a famous author, a line or, something like that. Some famous authors like Salman Rushdie, Anand Neelkantan, and they get Jeffrey Archer and people like that. And they just give you a line and you have to use that line in a story in whatever way you like, but without changing that line. So I sent in a short story. And it won the first prize. I was thrilled. Anand Neelkantan was the author for that story, and so I continued writing.
This is a nationwide competition with so many people taking part.
Yes, about 40,000-50,000, but all serious writers. Right. And it was a thrill. So then that actually set me off, and I got this collection of mine, the Disrobing of Draupadi and other stories. Yeah. And just to tell you, the Disrobing of Draupadi isn't about Draupadi, and she isn't disrobed. But that's the title. That's the title of the of one of the stories. Right. So the Disrobing of Draupadi, and this got published first, and it was received very well. And then the moment that came out, then my Goa short stories, within a few months, it was accepted by a publisher, and that came out. So that's how these two sets of shorts, one came out in 2018, one in 2020. And then last year I wrote a little novel for young readers, for older children, called The Curious Case of the Nandikot Nawab. And this came out, and
really a challenge to write for children in that sense.
It is actually, Rico. In fact, I think that writing for children is in many ways more challenging than writing for adults because of 2-3 things. One thing is you've got to tread that fine line between using language that is too elementary or language that would send your young readers to the dictionary every now and then. Right. And the second aspect is that for children, your book has to be somewhat of a page turner, because adults persevere. If there are a few pages that are not so interesting, an adult will persevere, but a young reader won't. If your book is not interesting, the young reader will shut it and go off to a video game or to Netflix, or so you're competing with that. And also, children or young people don't have that much experience of the world. They don't have that much information, that much background. So you can't assume many things. You have to give them that background, and yet your book can't sound pedantic, can't sound like a textbook. Then they're not interested. So that is the challenge. I think for a child, you have got to present a kind of world in which a child would like to live in. Then a child finds that, I suppose any reader would find.
Crafting a short story is definitely not easy. It calls for a lot of technique, construction. I know people who have gone for writing courses. Did it come intuitively to you because you read a lot?
See, yes. I haven't done courses. I love short stories. Whether they are O. Henry or Jeffrey Archer. I mean, Jeffrey Archer writes both in novels and short stories, or even R.K. Narayan. I love reading short stories, so I would, so I like writing them. People say, yes, that crafting a short story is very difficult. Sometimes a novel is easier. I think the other way around. I think that a novel is more difficult than writing a short story because I like writing short stories. But yes, a short story has to contain within itself enough information and enough satisfaction, not information, satisfaction at the end of it. The reader must feel that, yes, he has got something out of this short story. I like writing stories with a little twist in the tail. Not all my stories have them, but many of them have them because I like reading stories with a twist in the tail. But I think the most difficult kind of short stories but to write are what are called those slice of life stories, which don't have very strong plots, but it's the absolute beauty of the writing style that takes you through the story. I think those are the most difficult to write.
The journey is more meaningful than the arrival in that sense.
Yes, and in this, because your writing style has to, because there is no major plot involved. So so that is the challenge. But
Mr. Desai, when you write a story, what do you do with it? Because, for instance, a Goa story, it might be difficult for a publisher outside Goa to understand the context. I love what I was reading. But it's so typically Goan that unless you understand the nuances, you're not going to get what Desai is saying. That's the first thing. The second thing, the short stories are subjective and there's not much space for them in today's press. Earlier, the newspapers or the Illustrated Weekly of India had space for it. Not anymore.
I agree with you. In fact, even publishers, I'll take the second part of your question first. Even publishers are not always happy to publish. I don't know why short stories. I would have thought the opposite, because people are very busy. Reading a short story doesn't require so much time. In half an hour you finish a story, and people can read it on a suburban train. Yes. But yet publishers, when I first sent around my short stories, they said, we like the style of your writing, but send us a novel. Short stories don't sell. I don't know why. You're the publisher, you may know. But I mean that is a bit of a challenge.
I think it's our biases also, no? I think I'm not a fiction person per se. So, and there are people who have these ideas about what sells, what doesn't sell, and these are often market decisions.
I suppose. Of course, poetry is the worst.
Poetry is the worst, no doubt.
It's most difficult. But to get back to this, the Goa stories, you see, for one thing is I try and avoid using local words unnecessarily. And I think that is, you see, you use a local word, in this case either a Konkani word or whatever, if there is no common equivalent for it in English, and you want to say something very special. Otherwise, simply to try and give your story a kind of flavor of a place, you keep in every paragraph using a local word, makes no sense. And then have a glossary, I think puts off readers who, as you say, are not familiar with the setting. But now, when after this book was published, I had actually people from Kerala writing to me, people from Bengal writing to me, people from Tamil Nadu writing to me, that the stories spoke to them as though they were,
here.
Yes, if you could change names, they said just if the name was changed or if the place was changed, it could well have been a story from, because many of them are rural setting in this. Yeah. It could well have been a rural setting in Kerala. It could well have been a rural, village life.
And human emotions are the same.
Are the same everywhere. So I think these appeal. And for us, for example, now, when we read a story set in Spain or we read a story set in France, it still appeals to us. I mean, whatever you read of even Guy de Maupassant, not that they appeal only to the French, right. In translation they are so appealing. So I think human emotions are the same everywhere, and if you're able to tap into that, a local geography doesn't limit your story.
To shift gears a little bit on the highlights of your career, I know you served UNIDO all over the place, and a bit on the highlights of your career. which is not still not over, and you're getting your assignment still.
Yeah, through my the earlier part, I was in various districts even in places that are now in Chhattisgarh. As I was collector, additional collector, that kind of
tough
thing.
ones.
Tough but fascinating. Beautiful place, lovely people, people who respond, and you do a little for them and they respond with so much love. Of course, districts are large over there.
Yeah.
I mean, as an SDO, I had an area that was larger than Goa.
I see.
Because Madhya Pradesh is a large state.
True.
And, each district, the small districts of Madhya Pradesh would be at least 3 or 4 times the size of Goa.
Wow.
The large districts, one district that I was in the former, which is now Chhattisgarh, and Bilaspur district, before it was now 4 districts, that time it was 1 district, is as large as the state of Kerala, actually.
Oh, wow.
Huge districts in Madhya Pradesh. But beautiful place, lot of jungles, tribal areas.
If I could interrupt,
lovely.
the story is that RCVP Noronha, the other chief secretary, no relation of mine, of course, he chose this posting because of his love for shikar, wildlife photography, all these kind of
Yes, in the days when shikar was legal, he was a great shikari. Then he became a conservationist.
Central provinces and Berat.
Because Madhya Pradesh has beautiful forests, huge tracts of forests, lovely tiger reserves, lovely things.
Dom Morais, the other Goan connection, Dom Morais has written a book.
Dom Morais has written a book, Answered by Flutes, about Madhya Pradesh. Yeah, it was a story about Madhya Pradesh.
Any other Goan connections there?
Madhya Pradesh, I would say not really. I haven't come across...
except railway towns, maybe Jhansi and...
Jhansi, Jabalpur. Jabalpur has a bit of a smaller Goan community.
And the Goan photographers who seem to be all over the place in Madhya Pradesh, Uttar Pradesh.
There are now Goan architects who have done good work in Madhya Pradesh. I mean, Charles Correa has built a large number of buildings in Madhya Pradesh, including the State Assembly, designed by Charles Correa. The Bharat Bhavan is a beautiful cultural center designed by Charles Correa. In fact, his first bit was Kala Niketan, Kala Academy in Goa, but the Bharat Bhavan was, but Charles Correa calls it a non-building, because if you try to look at it, you can hardly see the building. And actually only when you go in, you see the huge spaces, and the background to it is the lake in Bhopal, beautiful building. And then he designed another building, which actually the Habitat Center in Delhi is a copy of that building, but Charles Correa designed it, the Paryavas Bhavan, in Bhopal, 3 major buildings.
So many interesting things, so you can't blame me for veiling your answer, but the question was about your career, and you need
to... So anyway, then later on, of course, then I became housing commissioner. Then I went to Delhi, and in Delhi I've served in different ministries, in the Ministry of Commerce, where actually there I had the privilege of handling India's WTO negotiations. So all the WTO trade. And before that, when I was in the Environment Ministry, I was involved in negotiating the Biodiversity Convention, the Convention on Forests, the Convention on Climate Change. That was my area that I dealt with, international cooperation. And in the Ministry of Commerce, I handled the WTO. And in Madhya Pradesh, I handled food, where we were the first, a long time ago now, that was about 12 years ago, but we were the first state to completely digitalize our procurement. Then it became the standard for the rest of the country. And finally, I was chief secretary there in Madhya Pradesh. And
stressful job? Stressful?
Like in any other job.
Any other senior job?
I think any other job anywhere. I would imagine a doctor who, if there's a pandemic going on, a doctor is under stress. Yeah. If there's a war, a military man is under stress. So, that's part of the job. Yeah. But also very enjoyable and very rewarding, I would say.
Creative. Making a difference.
Certainly creative.
You feel you're making a difference.
I have always felt that administration calls for a lot of creativity, a lot of innovation. And people who think, bureaucrat has got such a bad connotation, but I don't think. Therefore, I always say I'm an administrator, I'm not a bureaucrat. But anyway, after I finished being chief secretary, then I was appointed the chairman of the Real Estate Regulatory Authority of Madhya Pradesh, Retd. And I was there for 4 years when I finished with that. And now I'm in retirement in Goa, but liquidator of the cooperative bank that has gone under the license of which the Reserve Bank cancelled. And it is technically a multi-state bank because it used to have branches, I think, in Daman and Diu and all that. So it comes under the Central Government Act. So they asked me to be liquidator, and I thought it was interesting. It takes some of my time.
But this is a fascinating time because you just come back, and I hope the people of Goa realize the skills that Goans have all over the place and all over the world, and they also make the most of your many skills and your helpful nature to take things forward.
No.
It's a real pleasure, Tino, to have you here today, and grateful that you made the time for us. I really enjoyed encountering your books. They are part of my collection already, and I'm grateful for that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rico. It was my pleasure being here. Thank you.